traditional annual gardening. The reason for that is manyfold. First, we don't just like to plant plants, we like to plant self-supporting ecosystems. And so a self-supporting ecosystem is perennial-based. So the annual garden plants that we're used to eating off of, for example, the tomatoes, or a lot of stuff you find in the grocery store, it's all annual. So it needs continual fertilization generation. It needs continual human input. You need to sprout the plants every year and then put them in the ground, and then we have to harvest them. It's this constant, continual human effort. The more space you take up, when you have a dense garden that's multifaceted, it takes more and more human labor hours. So when we focus on the perennial plants, we establish an ecosystem that self-maintains, and all we need to really do is come in and harvest and cut it back. And as we cut it back, we mulch all that material, so nothing leaves here but the food. And all the material of the plants are cut back, or just put right back into the soil. And so you'll see that there's 42 fruit and nut trees here on the site. These are pears right here. There are 2 bananas up here and 2 papayas. There's also perennial, so those are perennial plants, trees. And there's also other perennial plants like the pepino dolce, which is in the middle of all these tomatoes right now. So when all these tomatoes die back, you'll see that shrub. And that's generally gets about 6 to 8 feet in diameter. It's a perennial evergreen shrub. Lives about 15 to 25 years. And by its 3rd year of life, it'll produce 200 to 300 fruits about the size of a small eggplant, thin-skinned like an eggplant. It's actually related to the Solanaceae family, so tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes. But it's sweet, like a melon. So it's called the pepino dolce. And so it's like it's a garden vegetable fruit. Very productive, prolific plant. And of course the bananas, papayas perform as perennial plants. 2 avocados right here, 2 more back there. We have perennial climbing vines just now coming up on the fence. So when these annual vines die down, those 2 in this one's here in the back. You'll see those. Those are chayote squash, really popular in Mexico and Central America. And you can see them, they're just starting to climb up the back of the fence there. I have 2 in my yard that are 8 years old, and they produce anywhere from probably 200, 400 squash per year, each plant.
Is that like militol?
What's that? Yeah, that's exactly right. It's the same plant, but that's the Creole word for it.
My wife's from New Orleans, and that's what they...
This is our potato cone strategy here. This is really interesting. When we talk about being sustainable, not to overuse the word, we talk about growing as much of our food as we can right where we eat it, right here in the city, trying to reduce the carbon emissions from the transportation system bringing us food. Our gardens, everybody tends to focus on fruits and veggies, and we love fruits and veggies. I mean, those are a passion, and those provide a lot of nutrition. They don't actually provide the calories that sustain society. The staple crops are traditionally one of sustained societies. And for America, that's wheat, corn, soy. And so we start to look at, well, if we really want to be self-sufficient and self-sustaining here in San Francisco, or at least closer to it, what are we growing? And what are the calorie crops that are going to sustain us here? We obviously can't do wheat. Wheat here, I would maybe grow 1 loaf of bread a year. Corn, again, not a great option for San Francisco. This site happens to be very sunny and hot, but in general, we wouldn't grow it very... That corn's doing good, I gotta admit. It's down there, it's on a really hot edge. It's not very appropriate for San Francisco to grow just a bunch of corn. Soy doesn't even grow here, so we don't have the right climate for soy in San Francisco. There's other things, rice, quinoa. Quinoa, if I grew nothing but quinoa on this site, I might be able to provide for my grain needs for just 1 person, maybe 3 months of the year. So when we started thinking about this issue, we started to think, well, what are the calorie crops for San Francisco? We've come up with 2 very important crops for San Francisco that we think we can grow very well here. We can grow them nearly year-round. We can grow them year-round in some places, and they provide the calories that we need. And the 2 crops are fava bean and potatoes. So fava bean, it's a winter crop. It's a nitrogen-fixing legume. It's good for soil building. It's a green manure plant. It's the greens are edible, and they're really quite delicious. It's like a spinach substitute. In fact, I like it a little bit better myself. than the bean itself, of course. If you chop the plant before it goes into bean production, it's actually fixing nitrogen. So it means it's pulling atmospheric nitrogen and using bacteria and storing it down in its roots. As soon as the plant flowers, if you just cut it off right at the base, that nitrogen stays in the soil. So what we do is in the fall, we plant it very dense, 6-inch diamond grid pattern across the entire site. And then we chop down 2/3 of it for nitrogen fixing properties, and we leave 1/3 standing for bean production. And we do that every year. And you can do it 3 times a year on this site. You can do it 4 times a year on the west side of San Francisco. The other important crop for San Francisco is potatoes. Potatoes are often, said to be like just high in starches, sugars, and stuff like that. But there's a lot of heirloom varieties. Potatoes are a perennial plant from South America. There are hundreds and hundreds of heirloom varieties of potato, and they all have different protein profiles. So the Idaho russet, which we've developed, in general is very starchy. It was genetically bred to grow very large, to provide a large potato for cropping and for sale. But a lot of the smaller heirloom varieties all have different high levels of proteins and other nutrients in them. So potatoes is actually a great staple crop that's not just a calorie putting on weight carbohydrate type food. So we grow them in these columns here. This is several reasons for this. One of them is that we can grow more potatoes in one spot. So in basically a 3-foot square, I have about 9 layers of potatoes in here. So we put down a layer of mulch, and then on top of the mulch we spread the compost, and then we set the potatoes, about 5 potatoes there. We put down another layer of mulch, more compost, 5 potatoes, and about 9 layers all the way up to the top of this column here. And if it leaves out the side, these are ready to harvest. And so the leaf of the potato is mostly died back. This is a squash growing around it, but here and there we might be able to see some potato greenery. So when the potato greenery dies back, it's ready. But you can store it here. You don't need to harvest this right now. So when you're ready to eat it, that's when you open it.
You just open up the whole chicken.
You just open up the cage, or you have 2 people lift up on the sides and spill it on the ground, so there's no digging. You just go through there, you grab your potatoes out, and then you take the cage, you take all the soil that's in here, and you use that somewhere else in the garden and start over again with fresh mulch and compost. That's to avoid disease propagation. Potatoes are susceptible to disease, so you expect a certain amount of loss. So you can do this anywhere. You can do this on a driveway, you can do it on a sidewalk, you can do it in a road, you can do it on a cement patio. You don't need to have direct soil contact. You can do it on a roof. And a regular family of 4, say, I estimated about 6-7 of these will provide most of your calorie crops for the year. And so you do them in rotation. So as you bust one open, then you rebuild it. And it's your storage. So when you finish eating the potatoes that are in your closet in the home, then you open one of these up, refill your closet, reassemble that, and you can go all year round.